Hey folks, Tyler Island here and welcome back. I'm an artist, illustrator, and professional instructor. Today we're talking about style. I went to the community to ask you guys what you wanted to hear about. And to no surprise, it is a popular topic. It overwhelms inexperienced artists, and there's a lot to it. The most popular things that turned out was actually developing and analyzing styles, having one versus multiple styles, what's more beneficial, and if I had any general tips and suggestions. So I'm gonna at least break this into two parts so I can just get them to you in a more timely manner. So today I'm gonna talk about analyzing style, where it comes from, breaking it down. I'll show you an example, and then at least in the next video we will talk about having one or multiple styles. So let me know, of course, below your favorite artists that have one or multiple styles. I'd love to see some examples and we can look at them. And of course, if you're new to the channel, subscribe. Now let's roll. Now, style comes from many places. It's an interpretation of nature, and it's how we as artists translate reality. There's not a right or a wrong way to do this. And so without any external influence on us, our creations would have their look being derived purely from reality, from one's own observations. And when we use these additional references, these external pieces of material and sources, we start to push our own sense of style as they guide our moment-to-moment decision-making. So style is defined by our decision-making. Our decision-making is essentially our process, and our process is how we manage the fundamentals. Our success with these fundamentals, of course, is determined by our relative skill level. So your style is going to come from your experience, whether it's characterized by its strength or its flaws, from what you consume or observe, or as a set of rules or guides you create for yourself. Now, if Patreon isn't your thing and you still want a dose of that extra thick cup of brush sauce, I do recommend this tutorial I just put out over on QBrush, ArtStation, and Gumroad. Over 2 hours long, really in depth, we break down a lot of the things this series will be covering on style. Hey guys, so like I mentioned, many of you are not sure how to break down style or perhaps even go about talking about it. And so that's what I'm going to demonstrate now. All this requires is a basic understanding of the fundamentals of art and design, and not a mastery. None of us really are. And once you're able to do this, you should be much more proficient at analyzing styles and then beginning to intentionally tweak your own. So what I'm saying is, don't try to develop a style if you still have your training wheels. Alright, so here is a fairly mid-range progress of that recent image I completed. You guys can definitely check out a huge part of that process in my previous upload. You guys can click it up in the corner here. And so basically, let's talk and break down a lot of the style decisions I made to get to this point. So there is photo textures being used. So overall, I think the texture and the lighting is fairly standard at this point. I didn't really push or pull anything in regards to that. If I zoom in here, you can see there's like photo texture here, you know, there's some photo in here, and of course some of the shapes of the trees and the bark and the branches, they're derived from photo-based textures as well. And what that will do for me up to this point is increase the detail density in the piece. So if I was going for something more realistic, I'm matching the level and the quality of that detail. All I would really need to do from this point is kind of tidy things up, stitch things up here and there, add a little more texture there, colorize this section that's a little off right there, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of like this is a foundation point that I've got myself to just by blocking in a huge amount of these fundamental aspects. Now the parts that are stylized, I'd say, the roofs on the houses. Obviously they're simple graphic shapes, right? There's no realistic texture in there, and their shapes themselves are exaggerated, so there's a little bit more line in them. And on that note, there is a good amount of exaggeration on the overall scale of the tree. So I'm really just exaggerating. I'm making them kind of look like Endor trees. They're absolutely enormous. I got into that in the previous episode. There is stylization on some of these red trees, some of these shrubs. I'm using very clear, simple shapes and going in on the texture within those. And of course, the color of those red trees are absolutely stylized. I absolutely pushed them. I made them a little more flat and graphic. And so one of the things I kept hearing about is like, I don't know how to analyze and I don't know how to break down style. If you can't look or talk about your painting, even at this basic level that I am, with you now in my piece, that means you're just lacking in your instruction. You're lacking in your fundamental knowledge. You need to go back. You need to study line, shape, pattern, rhythm, movement, flow, planes, forms, lighting, color, perspective. All these basic fundamentals of art, that's what I'm using to build and compose this as a scene. And so if you're struggling to do that, to articulate either someone else's work or your own, then you just gotta not put so much pressure on yourself in developing a style and just work on learning the language, right? The visual language and aesthetics of art itself. Now, if we actually break this down and take a pick at the final image I did a lot more stylization in the back end of this painting in regards to the overall lighting. I pulled it much further away from going in a realistic direction, and I started to simplify and romanticize my color choices. You can see here in the foreground, I removed a lot of the graves, like everything in here. It was just too noisy. If I made it really tiny, it's just like a wall of gray on gray on gray. And it wasn't like, nothing was jumping out, nothing was pronouncing. So again, I'm replacing complex things with simple things, and that's a decision that I was actively making. I also wanted, of course, tie in these pink shrubs so that these aren't the only elements in the scene of that color. It helps balance the whole piece. And I also, of course, pulled them from that bright pure red, which was working. I had no problem with that. But I wanted something like a little more toned down and something that harmonizes a little more with blues. Blues and magentas, if you see on a typical color wheel, they're right next to each other. Therefore they're analogous. So they're right next to each other. They just work really, really well. And then I also started to really make artistic decisions in regards to how I'm grouping and arranging the values. So again, if you're looking at real life, you'll often just see a ton of detail, a ton of information, even if it's like right in front of you. So artistically, what a lot of us do, myself included, we have to pick and choose how we want to shape, how we want to vignette, and how we want to display certain aspects. So I know, of course, coming into here, I need to get this house to read. I think it already is. The red does that. But I really balanced, and I fought a lot, which you guys will see momentarily. I got to make all of that group together. I want to simplify all of this noise, all of these rhythms, right? It's up and down, it's up and down, it's all around, it's big, small. They're all very similar too, so they're not that interesting. So if I just kind of flatline a lot of that, and then as you can see, there's no separation at all. I mean, I don't think there would be realistically either. So I have to artistically choose, to separate and make a line, which you can now see. So, right, we're going up, over, dip, over, up, down, right. I'm constantly changing how I'm using line, how I'm keeping that momentum moving forward, while simultaneously separating out the value structure. And again, this is an exaggeration, and it's a decision I made depending on a specific goal. I want this thing really graphic, really readable, and extra vibrant, which is again why I'm pushing the highlights here. Obviously, if I wanted to tone something like that down substantially, that would, that's only 1 or 2 clicks away. It's not that hard to do. I just need to get an airbrush and like, okay, I can make this more subtle, or more muted, and that would be more realistic. But no, I'm going a little bit more bombastic here. That does not exist because it really shapes the whole structure really well. Like it illuminates the entire mid-ground plane. There, and then it kind of drifts off. Right, but I have a little accent line over here. I have a big line right here. A medium shape here. A few smaller shapes. A few vertical shapes. I'm constantly using different forms of contrast to express what I need to do. Again, those are all very micro and small artistic decisions that ultimately lead into what I have as a style, because that's how you essentially get your style. It's just derived from a series of moment-to-moment decisions that you make as an individual, and it's about what you want to say, it's about how you want to say it, and what your personal preference is. I'm influenced by game art. I'm influenced by all these things that I mentioned in the previous video, where I love the aesthetic of them, right? I just like how they visually look. I love how they pop. I love how they jump out at me. I kind of like it's almost like a retro sort of comic-y, or anime sort of look to them as well. So these are all things that, have influenced me in subtle ways. So I'm still going to, based off the techniques I'm doing, I'm still getting to a certain point, and then I'm stopping and I'm thinking and I'm reflecting, all right, where do I really want to go with this though? So it's always a combination of technique and what the goal ultimately is. But again, I have the line leading there, these lines going down to there, right? This line going down there, over to there, and this line going like that. Everything in this scene has a subtle expression of movement to it. None of that is accidental. It is all an intentional act. Some people like to emphasize this more. Some people like to do that less. And so I'm trying to balance along these lines, how much texture do I actually want to display into the piece, so I'm balancing out those details. So there is a little more detail, see, along these major veins of movement. And then in between those areas, I'm choosing to keep things a little more simple. And so this is an example of when we're using these additional references, these external material and sources, maybe their memories or even experiences, then we start to push our own sense of style, and they guide that moment-to-moment decision making, giving you a bit more of a final result. So lastly, remember folks, all of your sensibilities, from your eye to your hand movements, will always be uniquely your own. Just try to relax and create. The more you experiment, the more you gain experience in a particular medium, the more your style will eventually emerge. Now, if you were at loss at all in what I was describing, if you have trouble studying art efficiently, then it's these elements and principles that you really need to be focusing on first and foremost. And I recommend, examining, studying really great artists like my pal Henry Wong here. He does these kind of quicker images, but they all really excel at these different fundamentals and principles. You can just check his work out, try to almost like critique it, try to analyze and break down the different facets of it, and then you can start essentially implementing that, in your own ways. So you look at this is all shapes, it's all lines, it's all patterns, it's all textures. There's different ways he's using mass. He's creating shapes, emphasis. They all have subtle focal points. These are really well crafted. So definitely check them out. Do breakdowns, you draw on your side. It's just a great way to kind of learn some of these basics. And basically the way I recommend a lot of people to learn these fundamentals and principles is to do these simpler images. Don't go starting some grand world building project, that's going to take months, if not years, to develop when you don't know or you're not familiar enough with the language of art. Just practice on these low stress, non-committal type of exercise based images, and just focus on what's important, the fundamentals.